I just want to share what a blessing Dr. Hugh Ross has been to me over the years. My father was a Caltech trained engineer, ended up actually graduating from UC Berkeley, courtesy of the U.S. military, but he always valued his time at Caltech. Very much a science and technology and math guy. My mother taught botany at the University of Colorado, so I come from a STEM family. When it was time to share the gospel with them and witness, they had heard a lot about the first scientific objections to the gospel. When I discovered Hugh Ross in his very first book, Fingerprint of God, it gave me a vehicle that I could actually use science to share the gospel with them, which was extremely important.
That in the midst of all of this, that the truth that the church possesses would be clearer than ever. We ask you for a true spiritual awakening. And Lord, we ask you to bless us as a church family. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. Hey, stay on your feet just for a second. Let's give a massively warm welcome to our dear friend, Dr. Hugh Ross. Hugh, come and join me if you will. Come on now, somebody. Yes, sir. Now, for those of you, go ahead and have a seat if you will. Thank you for that. Those of you that are newer around here, Hugh and his wife, Kathy. I saw Kathy back there somewhere. Where are you? There she is waving back there. They've been coming for many, many years here to Grace Church. It's been, I think, 18 months, and we were talking last time, the fall of 22. But Dr. Hugh Ross, again, I said this last weekend, one of the clearest minds. I mean, we just had dinner, and Ron can hardly contain himself when he's around this guy. He's like a kid in a candy store. He has been listening to Hugh, and then our Ron Krause, our director of tech, they've been listening and devouring your information for decades. So to have him here is a real treat. He's one of the clearest voices in the scientific world that brings validity to the truth of Scripture. It's what I love about his testimony. The two worlds of science and theology don't contradict. They actually affirm each other. And so afterwards, Hugh always goes out in the atrium. We have a lot of his resources that are out there. We encourage you to get all of them. He'll highlight a couple of them tonight. Share with your friends, some of your neighbors, classmates. Hugh will be out there to interact with you, sign some of your books if you'd like that. But then also we're going to do this. He's going to teach for a little bit. As he is teaching, you'll see a number up on the screen that you can text in questions. And then I'll come out towards here in a little bit to join Hugh. And we'll spend the last half hour or so engaging in your questions, whether it's on stuff that he teaches tonight or another question that you can take a bunny trail if you'd like to. That's fine too. And what'd you say earlier? You said the only rule with questions were...
No softball questions.
No softball questions. He says, bring them as hard and direct as you can, which I really, really appreciate. So, Lord, here we are. Open our ears and bless our friend in the name of Jesus. Amen and amen.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to come to this church. I speak in a lot of churches. This is a really special church. So thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate your passion to talk about the truth, life, and love of Jesus and use that to bring people to faith in Jesus Christ. I am an astrophysicist, but I also serve as a pastor in a church in Pasadena. Unusual church. We're between Caltech and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the headquarters of the Skeptic Society. So we get some interesting people coming to our church. I've been teaching a class, I can't believe it, for 49 years now, a class for skeptics where we invite people to come and engage us. And it's been just our pleasure to see these atheists from the Skeptic Society come to faith in Jesus Christ, also atheists from Hollywood that join us. And so what I've been asked to do this evening is take you through a quick survey of Genesis 1 to 11 and hit the most controversial parts of those chapters. Because what I've learned as a pastor in Pasadena is that you can get the skeptic past the first 11 chapters of the Bible, you're basically home free. It's those 11 chapters that really often pose to be a stumbling block for them to come to faith in Jesus Christ. So in a few minutes, I want to just hit those stumbling blocks and basically equip you how to get people past those so they can get to the gospel message, that you see in the New Testament. I'm also going to speak briefly, too, about the mandate that God gave us to manage our planet and what we're to do with it and how we're to apply that to some of the really controversial issues we're facing today. We are going to have a Q&A, but if you don't get to ask questions, I do take questions on both my Facebook and Twitter page, and also we have a 24/7 YouTube channel where there's thousands of video clips that you can watch. And you can also just Google my name and see a lot of video recordings that I've done with atheist scientists. Some of them are actually quite humorous. But what we're doing this evening and tomorrow as well, we're giving away a free copy of my latest book. This is book number 23 that I've written, Rescuing Inerrancy, a Scientific Defense. So if you scan that QR code or go to our book table out there, they will give you a free copy of this book, Rescuing Inerrancy. But what I'm going to try to cover tonight, as I mentioned, are the controversial parts of what we see in Genesis and how to get past the so-called scientific challenges. And Genesis 1 to 11 traditionally has been the greatest source of scientific doubt about the reliability of the Bible. For me personally, it was my gateway to come into a relationship with Jesus Christ. I was not raised in a Christian home. I was one of these nerdy kids that started studying astrophysics when I was 7 years of age. And it's my studies of astrophysics that brought me to faith in Jesus Christ, and particularly the first 11 chapters of the Bible that persuaded me that indeed the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. And I've written this book on the subject, Navigating Genesis, and anyone can get a free chapter just by going to reasons.org/Ross. But let me go first of all to the best known Bible verse that there is. It's not John 3:16, it's Genesis 1:1. I've traveled around the world and everybody seems to know Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I remember debating Michael Shermer, the executive director of the Skeptic Society, and says, this is where the Bible gets it wrong on the very first verse. We know scientifically that the universe was formed before the earth. And what Michael Shermer didn't recognize is that biblical Hebrew has a very small vocabulary size. They don't have a word for the universe, but they got this phrase, the heavens and the earth. It's used 13 times in the Old Testament, and if you look up those 13 passages, it's a reference to the totality of physical reality, all matter, energy, space, and time. So wherever you see that phrase, the heavens and the earth, it's referring to the entire universe. And it says, in the beginning, God created the universe. And now we have space-time theorems that prove that Genesis 1:1 got it right. Theorems that tell us there's a beginning to space-time, matter, and energy. Now, one of the non-Christian astrophysicists that was responsible for the most famous of these space-time theorems, he wrote a book, and this is what he stated in the book. He says, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. And what is that problem? Proof of a space-time beginning implies a causal agent beyond space and time who creates our universe's space, time, matter, and energy. So just the very first sentence of the Bible, in the context of the space-time theorems, proves that a miracle-working God must exist. Now, sometimes I run into skeptical atheist scientists and say, I want proof of a miracle. And I say, well, what bigger miracle could you ever ask for than the coming into existence of the entire physical universe? We can now prove that beyond any reasonable shadow of doubt. Well, what I want to do is quickly take you through the rest of Genesis chapter 1, and then we're going to jump to the flood account. Okay, but in the context of Genesis 1, 3 key points. My wife is sitting back there, and she says, don't do 30 points. That will work at Caltech. But for a church audience, reduce it down to just 3 points. So these are my 3 points, the 3 most important things. What is the point of view for the Genesis 1 creation days? What does this word day in Genesis 1 really mean? What's its definition? And then what about the description of the creation events? What about their description and their order? Does it match scientific reality? So here's point one, a point of view. We see this, here we go. Genesis 1:2, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters of planet Earth. A point of view for Genesis 1:1 was the universe. A point of view for the 6 creation days is the surface of planet Earth. And a lot of skeptics miss that change in point of view. If you keep the point of view up in the universe, everything you see in Genesis 1 is scientific nonsense. Put the point of view in the surface of the earth, everything is a perfect fit with the established scientific record. As Galileo said, the biggest mistake you can make in Bible interpretation is to get the wrong point of view. And what we see in Genesis 1:2, God is hovering over the surface of the waters, is dark on the surface of the waters. The water covers the whole surface of the earth, and the earth is formless and void. It's empty of life and unfit for life, but the Spirit of God begins his work, and we have the unfolding of the 6 creation days. Now, it's not just Genesis 1 that takes you through the content of the 6 creation days. The book of Job does, in Job 37, 38, and 39. So does Psalm 104, the longest of the creation psalms, and then Proverbs chapter 8. And so those are 3 additional places you can go to get the scientific details. But this is what it says in Job 38, verse 9. God speaks, and he says, I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness. So notice that the book of Job explicitly states why it's dark on the surface of the waters. When God created the universe was filled with light, but it was dark on the surface of the waters because God had blanketed the primordial earth with clouds that were opaque to light. If you want an analogy, think of Venus. Venus is an atmosphere 90 times thicker than the present day earth. Because of that thick atmosphere, the only visible light that gets through to the surface is at the very deep red end of the spectrum. The primordial earth had an atmosphere 200 times thicker than it has today. No visible light at all would get through to the surface of the waters. So if you remember nothing else from tonight, remember this. The frame of reference, the point of view for the 6 creation days is on the surface of the waters, below the clouds, not above the clouds. Okay, that's point 1. Point 2, what does this word day mean? Well, in the Hebrew, the word is yom. And pick up any lexicon, you'll see it's got 4 distinct literal definitions. It can mean part of the daylight hours, all of the daylight hours, a 24-hour period, or a long but finite period of time. And you can see this even without looking up a Hebrew lexicon. Just read Genesis 1. Creation day 1, it uses the word day for the daylight hours. Creation day 4, it contrasts seasons, days, and years. That's day for 24 hours, but Genesis 2:4 uses the same word day to refer to the entirety of creation history. That's day as a long period of time. Now, what we see in Psalm 95 in Hebrews 4 is that we're still in the 7th day. We're encouraged there to live our lives in such a way that we can enter into God's 7th day. Something else I noticed the first time I picked up the Bible at age 17 was that I noticed that the first 6 creation days end with an evening morning statement. I didn't know what the Hebrew words for evening and morning meant, but I knew at a minimum that evening morning phrase was telling me each of the days has a definite start time and a definite end time. You get to creation day 7, there's no evening morning phrase. The reason why? The day is not yet finished. It began, but is not yet finished. And what does the text tell us about the 7th day? For 6 days God creates. On the 7th day he stops creating. And we're told to emulate God's Sabbath practice. For 6 days he creates. The 7th day he stops creating. What does he do in the 7th day? he focuses on the most important reason why he created. What it tells us throughout the Bible is that God began his works of redemption before he created anything at all, implying that everything that God creates is for the purpose of redemption. And I've written 7 books documenting that point, that it's all for the purpose of making possible the redemption of billions of human beings from his sin. For 6 days, God creates. On the 7th day, he stops creating and he redeems. The 7th day is a day when he focuses on his work of redemption. In the same way, we work for 6 days. On the 7th day, we dedicate our lives to the most important issues of life. So we stop our normal employment and focus on what's most important in life. Now, I also noted that the 7th day answers the fossil record enigma. What do we see about that fossil record? We see the appearance of new phyla, new classes, new orders, new families happening frequently before humanity shows up. But once humans are on the scene, none of that happens. For 6 days, God is creating new phyla of life, new classes, orders, families, genera. On the 7th day, all that stops. God focuses on his works of redemption. So this answered for me the fossil record enigma. Why the fossil record looks so different before humanity than after humanity. You can read about all this in one of my 23 books, A Matter of Days. Again, you can get a free chapter at reasons.org/Ross. Basically, I make the point, if you integrate all the creation texts in the Bible, not just those in the book of Genesis, but in all 66 books, then the only way to read all those creation texts literally and consistently is that the days of creation are 6 consecutive long periods of time. Okay, what about the order of the events? Genesis 1:3, it says, "Let there be light." Now notice it doesn't say that God created the light or made the light. He did that in the beginning when he created the universe. It says, "Let there be light." This is the first time that the light that pervades the universe came through Earth's atmosphere, and light appears on the surface of the earth, and now photosynthesis can begin. When it says the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters, that's the Spirit of God bringing life on the surface of the waters. But it was necessary that light come through so the photosynthesis could begin. And so our atmosphere went from opaque to translucent. Then we go into Creation Day 2. Creation Day 2 is the shortest of the statements about the creation days. It basically says, let there be water above and water below, water above and water below, and then we go to the book of Job, and it goes into great detail on what God did on Creation Day 2. Job 37 and 38 expand the single sentence you see in Genesis chapter 1 into an entire discourse of how God designed and created this amazing water cycle where multiple forms of liquid precipitation fall from the clouds and multiple forms of frozen precipitation. And we need all of these different forms to be falling from the clouds in order to have global human civilization. Then Creation Day 3, it says, let the dry ground appear. And this is when God transforms our planet from a water world. So up until Creation Day 3, there was only water on the surface of the earth. On Creation Day 3, God transforms the earth, so we now have oceans and continents. And once the continents are in place, we now have a permanent situation. The planet from that point onwards always has continents and oceans. You see that in Psalm 104, verses 6 through 9. Now, I was reading this for the first time at age 17, and that was a time when all the geology textbooks were saying the continents have always been here. And so what we see back in the late 1950s, this is the view of the continents. And it says, that's not what the Bible is saying. The Bible says the world begins with only water, and then we get continents. But I had the opportunity when I enrolled at the University of British Columbia to take the first ever course taught on plate tectonics. We had 2 of the 3 geophysicists who launched the discipline of plate tectonics at the University of British Columbia, where I was getting my undergraduate degree. And in that course, they presented this view of the growth of the continents, that it steadily increases as plate tectonics kicks in and begins to form continents, so the continents get bigger and bigger and bigger. I remember talking to the professors after class and saying, I notice you have it starting at around 7% of the surface area of the Earth. Could it possibly be 0? And they said, it could be anywhere between 0 and 10%. We really don't know. I said, well, looks like the Bible could have gotten it right, that it really does begin as a water world. Well, what happened in 2018 is that physicists began to understand what's called the deep oxygen cycle, which is a key factor that plays the role in building continental land masses. And this is what they published, that for the first billion years, there's only water on the surface of the Earth. Plate tectonics begins to kick in, but a very slow growth of the continents, and then a little after around 2.2 billion years after the formation of the Earth, we get this sudden growth in continental landmass, and then it very gradually increases thereafter until it reaches our present day 29%. Incidentally, to have global human civilization, it won't work at 28%. It won't work at 30%. It has to be 29%. And that's where we are today. In the future, it's going to hit 30%. But we're here at the optimal time. But this is a demonstration that the more we learn about the geophysical history of the Earth, the tighter and tighter fit we get with what Genesis 1 taught thousands of years ago. And hey, if you want to read about this, I produce an article series called Today's New Reason to Believe. And on the June 11th, 2018, at our website, you'll see an explanation of how physicists came up with this discovery. But what you notice in Genesis 1, God's not done with creation day 3. Once we have continental land masses in place, what does he do? He creates vegetation on the continental land masses. Let the land produce vegetation. And it gives you 3 examples, translated into English as trees, fruit, and seeds. The original Hebrew words are much broader in definition than what you see in those English words, and they're just 3 of many examples. It was the 3 that people living thousands of years ago would be familiar with. Today we know the term vegetation is much more comprehensive. Let the land produce vegetation. The word for vegetation, dasha, means any life form that engages in photosynthesis. So it would include microbial life forms like cyanobacteria. It would also include redwood trees in that category. Now, for a long time, we didn't have fossils demonstrating that vegetation was on the continental land masses before the first appearance of animals. Today we do. We not only have isotope evidence, we have actually found fossils demonstrating that vegetation was abundant on the continental land masses before the first appearance of animals, which is described on creation day 5. But before we get to creation day 5, the text says, let there be lights in the sky, referring to the sun, moon, and stars. That's verse 14. And what we see in the rest of the sentence, let there be these great lights in the sky so they may serve as signs to mark seasons, days, and years. And again, I remember reading that at age 17 and said, who needs those signs? Well, the plants don't need it, the vegetation don't need it, the microbes don't need it. All the animals do. All animal life forms need to know, at least on occasion, the position of the sun, moon, and stars in the sky in order to regulate their biological clocks. And so this is the precursor to God creating animals. The atmosphere has to clear. Now, what happened in 2018, a group of physicists said, we know that the early atmosphere, when photosynthesis began, was extremely hazy. Let's actually have, they had this giant flask, they filled it with the known components of Earth's early atmosphere, and then they pushed the oxygen content up. Because what we now know is that the past oxygen history of the Earth looks like this. way less than 1% oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere for the first 2 billion years. Then you get the first great oxygenation event where it jumps up to about 2% and then falls back down to less than 1%. Then it jumps up to 2%. But then there's this sudden jump from 2% to 8%. We now understand the physics of what caused that sudden jump. I'm actually going to be writing an article on that shortly. In fact, I think I just did a podcast on it, so it'll be released in a few days. But what this flask experiment demonstrated, when you got less than 1% oxygen in the atmosphere looks like this. If you're on the surface, looking forward, looking up, just the thick haze everywhere. You can't see anything beyond about 20 feet. But increase the oxygen content from 2% up to about 4%, you can actually see some things in the distance, but not very well. Push it up to 8%, and you can see things in the distance very clearly, and now for the first time, you can see stuff in the sky. The sun, moon, and stars become visible for the first time. And what's interesting is the moment the oxygen jumped from 2% to 8%, we immediately have animals. There is no time delay. There's no evolutionary prehistory. You go from nothing but microbes and tiny animals, microscopic animals, to having animals as big as 2 meters across. Those animals need a minimum of 8% oxygen. The moment oxygen hits 8%, they're there right away. And multiple phyla, not just one phyla of life. And then we have another jump where it goes from 8% to 10%. The moment it hits 10%, we now have animals that are not just 2 meters across that are filter feeders without a digestive tract or without a circulatory system. When you got 10%, you can now have complex animals like us. The moment it hits 10%, you get them. And what you see at the beginning of the Cambrian explosion, excuse me, you get more than 50 fundamental body plans of animal life, what biologists call phyla. They all show up simultaneously, they show up suddenly, they show up the moment oxygen hits 10% without any evolutionary background. The most profound challenge to the evolutionary paradigm. And what did we see in the text on Creation Day 5? Let the waters teem with living creatures. So this is when God creates these swarms of sea creatures, where even the phylum that we belong to, the chordate phylum, shows up at the very beginning of the Cambrian explosion. And this is what Gregory Ray, an expert in the Cambrian explosion, says. It says the Cambrian explosion of body plans poses an outstanding problem for macroevolution. In other words, there is no naturalistic explanation for these macroevolutionary events. In another review paper, another expert in the Cambrian explosion, Kevin Peterson, said this: elucidating the materialistic basis for the Cambrian explosion, that is a non-theistic basis for the Cambrian explosion, has become more elusive, not less, the more we know about the event itself. And in my book, Improbable Planet, I quote from 7 different evolutionary biologists and paleontologists, basically saying we can't come up with a naturalistic explanation for either the Avalon explosion or the Cambrian explosion. I'll actually speak a little bit about this tomorrow when I address the Sunday school class. But here's what impressed me when I was reading this for the first time at age 17. Once you understand that the creation days each refer to an epoch of time, and that the frame of reference of the point of view is the surface of the earth underneath Earth's clouds, the creation event's scientific accuracy is 10 for 10. 10 creation events, all correctly described, all in the correct chronological order. And seeing those factors proved for me to be a major reason for my coming to faith in Jesus Christ. Because what I had done previously is go through the other religions of the world, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Zoroastrianism, Baha'i, and the best I found outside of the Bible was a creation story that got 2 out of 14 right. The Bible is the only one that got a perfect score. 10 for 10 on the creation events, 4 for 4 on the initial conditions. Now, What you see at the very end of Genesis 1, God explains what he created. And the last thing he creates is we human beings. We are the epitome of what God creates. We alone are created in the image of God. Of all the life forms on planet Earth, we're the only ones that ask questions like, why am I here? What is my purpose? Is there something beyond the universe? Is there a God? Can I somehow find that God? No other species of life asks those questions. We alone are endowed with a capacity to discover God and form a relationship with him. Now, the analogy God gives us, he created the birds and the mammals, and he created them to relate to us and to serve and please us, a higher species. Likewise, he created us to relate to God and to serve and please God, a higher being. That's why Job said, look to these birds and mammals. They'll teach you. They'll teach you how to come into relationship with God. But at the very end of Genesis 1, what does God say to humanity? He says, you are the epitome of my creation. I'm putting you in charge as managers of planet Earth. You're to manage the resources of planet Earth for your benefit and the benefit of all other life on planet Earth. The significance of that for our day is God is saying that he has designed the earth in such a way that we can do what's good for us and do what's good for the rest of Earth's life. We won't have to choose between what's good for us and what's good for the rest of Earth's life. I say that because a main controversy in our day and age is global warming and climate change, where you got politicians saying we have to make a choice between what's good for us and what's good for the rest of Earth's life. The Bible is basically telling us we won't have to make such a choice. If we actually research the resources of planet Earth adequately, we will find solutions that are for our benefit, and I mean our economic benefit, and for the benefit of all the rest of Earth's life. And so, consequently, one of my books is called Weathering Climate Change, where I make the point that indeed there are multiple solutions to climate change and global warming that benefit us, would actually dramatically increase the economic well-being and the health of all human beings, and at the same time enhance the quality of all the world's ecosystems and benefit the rest of Earth's life. There really are win-win solutions. And if you got win-win solutions, you don't need politicians. You just simply need to lay out the economic benefits and say, go for it. So you can check out Weathering Climate Change. I'll give you a little hint about that. What's happening today is they're basically going after fossil fuels and say, we got to stop all those fossil fuels because they release greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. All of that is true. However, trying to construct massive arrays of wind turbines and solar panels also has a fossil fuel cost, and we need to weigh that. And one of the things that's being overlooked is that when you burn coal, you release a lot of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. You also release a lot of particulate matter to the atmosphere, which goes into our lungs and causes us to have lung respiratory issues. It's not a big factor here in America. Why? Because we've stopped burning coal for heating and air conditioning and for driving all of our cars, and we're using natural gas instead. When you burn natural gas, there's no particulate matter pollution. There's no sulfate aerosols that are released, and you only get half the greenhouse gases you get with coal. So if you want a dramatic drop in greenhouse gas emission, stop burning coal, burn natural gas instead. And guess what? Natural gas is way more abundant and it's a lot cheaper. And so it would boost our economy. And guess who is sitting on the largest stores of natural gas in the world? North America. And so we could sell our natural gas to Asia, get them to stop burning coal. And you know what's happening in Asia today? Because of the fact that they're burning coal for their energy, the life expectancy of the average Asian is 3 years less than what it would be if they weren't burning coal at all. And for people in India, it would be 8 years less. And for parts of India, it would save 12 years off their lifespan. So India today and China is paying a huge health cost because of the particulate matter pollution. That could be eliminated overnight. Burn natural gas instead of coal. And that would boost our economy because we'd be selling all of our natural gas. It would boost their economy because the natural gas is cheaper. And they would save billions, trillions of dollars on healthcare costs. And that would buy us the time to switch from natural gas to thorium nuclear reactors. Now, there's a big push against nuclear reactors. I understand that. You get a lot of radioactive waste with nuclear reactors, uranium reactors. With thorium reactors, you don't have radioactive waste that remain dangerous for 50,000 years. They remain dangerous for only 100 or 200 years. You get 300 times as much energy from 1 ton of thorium than you do from uranium. It's safe to mine it. It's impossible to have a meltdown at the reactor. It's also impossible to use the reactor to make nuclear weapons. It really is the ultimate energy source. It would provide us with energy for less than half the price of hydropower, which is now the cheapest energy source. That's one of 40 solutions I give in weathering climate change. But let me spend a few minutes on Noah's flood. I've been putting posts about this on my Facebook page for the last couple of weeks, and I've discovered this is way more controversial than what I thought. In fact, a week ago, I just put up a little post about Noah's Ark. I got flooded with 6,000 questions from atheists and skeptics. And what I discovered is these atheists and skeptics haven't read the Bible, but they've heard what people say about the Bible. And they got a completely mistaken concept of what the Bible teaches about Noah's flood. They think it's crazy, they think it's a total myth, but because they can't get that past that issue, they read off the entire Bible as being nothing but mythical nonsense. And so here's a few tips on how to get your friends past that barrier of Noah's flood. Number one, a lot of these skeptics and atheists, and for that matter, quite a few Christians, think the Bible teaches that the flood was globally extensive. What it does teach is that the flood of Noah wiped out the entire world of ungodly people and all the animals associated with ungodly people. But I think we can all be confident there were no ungodly people at that time living in Antarctica, and no animals associated with humanity living in Antarctica. And why would God wipe out all the penguins if those penguins hadn't been tainted one iota by human sin? Okay, this is what it says in Psalm 104. It says, speaking about God, you covered it, the earth, with the deep. The waters stood above the mountains, but at your rebuke the water fled. They went down into the valleys, the place you assigned for them. And what Psalm 104 is doing is taking you through the 6 creation days. So here it's addressing creation day 3, when God transformed our world from a water world to where we now have water going down to the place that God assigned and the continental landmass is appearing. That's verses 6, 7, and 8. This is what it says in verse 9 about these new continents. It says, you set a boundary that the waters cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. So here Psalm 104 explicitly rules out a global flood. Basically says once we got continents, never again are we going to return to a water world. And this is what 2 Peter 3:6 says. It says, by water also the world of that time was deluged and destroyed. Now here the Greek word is cosmos. It can mean the universe, it can mean the totality of the earth, but whenever the word cosmos is qualified with an adjective, it means less than the earth. And notice here it says the world of that time. And this is what the Greek words are, tote cosmos. And that tote means world at the time the event took place. Basically what Peter is doing here, he's contrasting the world of Noah with the world of Rome. In both cases, it's part of the planet, but the world of Rome is different than the world of Noah. And this is what it says in 2 Peter 2:5. He brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly for the destruction of ungodly people. So he doesn't say he brought the flood upon the whole world, it's the world of ungodly people. So it's that part of planet Earth where ungodly people lived and the animals that were owned by these ungodly people. As the book of Leviticus explains, only the birds and mammals that are in the possession of ungodly people can be tainted by the sin of ungodly people. Leviticus, for example, speaks about the problem of a cow that's in the habit of goring other animals and human beings. When that happens, the owner of the cow is to be addressed. And if the cow continues in that behavior, what does Leviticus say? The cow is to be killed, and the owner of the cow is also to be killed. Basically saying, the fault is not the cow, it's the owner of the cow. It's the mean dog syndrome. Now, these animals are not sinners. God designed them to please and serve their human owners. And what brings pleasure to the human owner is for that animal to viciously attack other people and animals. That's how the animal will behave. It does that thinking it's serving its human owner. And so these are the animals that are mentioned. There are 7 different Hebrew words for the animals in the Genesis flood account. And what it's basically saying, we're not talking all life being wiped out by the flood. It's the nefesh basar that's wiped out by the flood. The soulish animals, the birds and mammals that are in relationship with human beings. And as Leviticus points out, these are the only animals that can be damaged by human sin. So the flood was universal to all averse ungodly people. All ungodly people are wiped out in all their animals. But it's not saying the flood was globally extensive. And atheists are fond of pointing out that it's simply scientific nonsense to posit a global flood. They're correct. There's no geological evidence that supports such a notion. But that's not what the Bible teaches. Now, what about the date? Another thing I see atheists saying is there's no way we can sustain the Bible's teaching that Noah's flood happened 5,500 years ago. But that's not the date the Bible assigns for Noah's flood. It took a year for the flood waters to recede. Now, the only way it would take that long for the flood waters to recede is if you got huge amounts of melting snow and ice. I mean, there was a time when the Mississippi Valley, and I think there was some flooding even here near St. Louis about 30 years ago. But that flood lasted just 3 or 4 months, some places just 1 month. The reason why the flood lasted that long, yes, the Mississippi was taking the water out into the Gulf of Mexico, but there were huge amounts of melting snow and ice in the Rockies that were replacing the water that was flowing out into the Gulf of Mexico. Same thing's the case. To have Noah's flood last for a whole year, there had to be huge amounts of melting snow and ice. So much so, we recognize the flood must be an ice age event. When was the ice age? The last ice age was 150,000 to 14,000 years ago. But we also see in Genesis 10 to 11 that the flood preceded the great migration and colonization events. What do you see in Genesis chapter 9? God repeats the command to Noah that he gave to Adam and Eve. I've created you, multiply and fill the earth. But what do we see in Genesis chapter 11? Humanity refused to obey God's command. We're going to build a city and a tower so that we will not be scattered over the face of the earth. We're going to be one nation and one locale with one language. And God realized that was a prescription for oppression. Basically, the theme of Genesis chapter 11 is antitrust legislation. Just like we know what happens when one corporation gets total control over a product, what do? They diminish the quality of the product and they raise the price to the consumer. Same thing happens if there's only one government over all the peoples of the world. That one government will oppress its citizens. And so what God did, he scattered humanity over the face of the earth, gave them different languages. It actually says in Genesis 11, he established geographical barriers so that a weak nation could live next door to a strong nation and depend on the geography to give it protection against a strong nation, so that nations would now have to compete with one another for citizens. We live in a nation that's benefited from the oppression of other nations. We've received immigrants from around the world, from nations that oppress their citizenry, and they came here to find freedom and have been able to expand the economy of the United States. I pray that that will continue. It will continue to be a nation that does not oppress its citizenry. But we see in Genesis chapter 11 is that God scatters humanity over the face of the earth. He does it suddenly and aggressively. Now, I've got a book coming out of Noah's flood within about a year. The book is finished. It's in editorial process now. But what's exciting about that book, there are scientific discoveries made in the last 6 to 18 months that now establish that Northern Europe was colonized at the same time as Southern Europe, at the same time as the far east of Asia, at the same time as Australia, at the same time as Borneo and the Philippines and Japan and all of Africa. All those dates are the same. And so it documents what we see in Genesis 10 and 11, that indeed there is an event where God aggressively scattered people all over the face of the earth and did it simultaneously. Now, what is that date? Carbon-14 dating establishes that that occurred 49,000 to 42,000 years ago, which means Noah's flood has to predate that. That's still in the last ice age, where you're going to have lots of melting snow and ice. But now that gives us a date for Noah's flood that is consistent with all the scientific evidence. There is no scientific challenge to what the Bible teaches about Noah's flood. Once we understand its extent, and once we understand its rough date for this. You can read about this in Navigating Genesis, and hey, when you leave today or show up tomorrow, you can get a free copy of this book, Rescuing Inerrancy. Just scan that code or go to our table. They'll give you a free copy of the book. And I wrote this book because there was a team of theologians that came to me and said, there are theologians all around the world that are abandoning the doctrine that the Bible is the inspired, error-free Word of God in everything it touches. And the reason why they're abandoning that doctrine, they think science forces an abandonment of this doctrine of biblical inerrancy. They said, Hugh, you're the scientist. We want you to write the book. What's wonderful is these theologians are coming up with books that complement my book. So there's going to be a series of books basically making the point that in the 21st century, the doctrine of biblical inerrancy is more defensible than it's ever been in the past history of the light. Science is actually giving us a stronger case for biblical inerrancy, not a weaker case. You can read the book and check it out for yourself. But I want you to leave with this. The more we learn about science, the more reasons we gain for the Bible as God's inspired, inerrant word, not just on faith, practice, and doctrine, but science, history, and geography, everything that the Bible teaches. Okay, quick survey of a lot of controversial subjects. We're now going to have a Q&A time where you can bring up these controversies for greater discussion or any other controversies you've heard of. Again, we only have one rule for the Q&A time. We don't want softball questions. Please give us the tough questions you're getting from your non-Christian friends, associates, and relatives.
Can we just thank him real quick before we transition? Thank you, Dr. Ross.
Thank you.
I want to jump in here because I know every time you come, there's a lot of people, this is the first time they've ever heard that a Bible guy can claim that the earth is more than 6,000 years old. So I would like to start just with, because I've watched several of your videos online, which I'd encourage you to do, because Hugh debates constantly. And so, you know, for those of you that have looked at it, you just have a younger earth than some of the numbers he's given. Conclusion, I would just encourage you to watch those debates. They're always mostly friendly, and I learn a lot. And I know you know just as good as them. I want to ask you, what are the top 3 arguments that you hear the most that young earth people come to you with? Like, what are the top, just give us the top 3.
Well, the top 2 are as if we let the universe and the earth be billions of years old, isn't that going to open the door for naturalistic evolution? And number 2, they're concerned about, hey, we're looking at billions of years. Doesn't that mean that we got animals dying before the sin of Adam? So those are the 2 big ones. And then they think that biblical inerrancy requires that these days be 24-hour periods.
So on the 24-hour period, if I take the 7 days as 24-hour days, because I appreciate how you broke down what the Hebrew word can mean. If day 1, 2, 3, 4, and on is 24-hour days, what do young Earth, how do they interpret the seventh day, considering there's clearly not implied a 24-hour day there?
They believe that the seventh day is a 24-hour day, so they believe it was long ago. And then I said, well, what do you think happened after that? And they said, well, I don't get good answers on that one. Okay. But that's why I made the point in my talk. The Bible is clear. We're still in God's seventh day. It's not a 24-hour period. We're still in the seventh day. We will be in that seventh day until God redeems the full number of human beings that he intends to redeem, Romans 8:23.
Okay. And then earlier when you were mentioning Psalm 104 as it relates to the flood, how do we know that Psalm 104, when it says, I won't flood the earth again, isn't implying Noah's flood?
That's a good question, because I get that in the debates I have with young earth creationists. They say Psalm 104 is not a creation psalm. It's a psalm about the flood. I said, well, this is not a short psalm. Read the entire psalm. And when you read the entire psalm, it clearly is not a psalm about the flood. It's a psalm about creation, and that's how 19 centuries of the church has understood Psalm 104. And by the way, there are 5 creation psalms amongst 150 psalms, and Psalm 104 is the most explicit and the longest, the most detailed of the creation psalms. So I said, I don't know how you can possibly fit Noah's flood into that. And they also have a problem with the book of Job, because Job 38 makes a similar statement that you see in Psalm 104, that once we got continents, they're a permanent barrier to the waters. Never again do we get a water world.
You mentioned you've written 23 books. What would you recommend the most for us that have friends that are using science as a reason to, you've referenced many times, to just kind of mock the Bible and to say, the Bible's full of myths, because science clearly contradicts what the Bible says. In all of your books, what is the one that you would recommend?
Well, that's a bit of a challenge, because I tell people, don't recommend a book until you find out what kind of non-Christian you're talking to and what their issues are. But the one I found that seemed to have a big impact with people who are not yet believers is Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Because for many unbelievers, the big issue is, why would a loving God tolerate evil? And Why the Universe does basically explains how God designed the physics of the universe to eradicate evil once and for all. And once it's eradicated, the universe will have fulfilled its purpose, and God will replace our universe with a brand new creation, a creation where there's no gravity, no thermodynamics, no electromagnetism, no strong and weak nuclear forces. None of those laws of physics will be needed anymore, because there will no longer be any evil. And so that means that when we enter the new creation, don't worry about your body decaying under the influence of thermodynamics. There won't be any thermodynamics. Don't worry about your chin falling as you get older. There will be no gravity. That's not going to happen. And other body parts won't sag either. And don't worry about electromagnetism wrinkling your skin. There won't be any wrinkling of your skin. But right now, we need those laws of physics, because in God's hands, they're very efficient tools for eradicating evil completely and quickly.
Okay, I like how you're just point blank. I appreciate that. Here's a good one. Did Adam and Eve, now it's going somewhere, so everybody's going to laugh for a second, but did Adam and Eve have belly buttons? That's the question. Because the question is, if they were created as adults, then why couldn't God create creation where it looked old? And so therefore, he just created, but he created a mature tree or a mature universe, because surely Adam and Eve was a mature adult compared to a baby.
Well, let's get to the belly button issue first.
Thank you.
He wouldn't need to create Adam and Eve with a belly button, because neither one of them came from a womb of a woman. On the other hand, he would have to create them with seam points or seam lines. And by the way, your belly button isn't the only seam point or seam line on your body. You've got other ones. It's the basketball principle. You can't make a basketball without having a hole or a line somewhere in the basketball or the football. Our human body is the same thing. So yeah, they may not have had a belly button, but they would have had other seam points or seam lines just like we do today. Now, the other one was...
about creating Adam
yeah.
and Eve, probably not as babies, we're assuming, right?
Right. Well, the problem is people look at the height of Adam and said his height would indicate that he was created with the appearance of age. That would be true only if Adam came from the womb of a woman. But if God created him from the dust of the earth, as it states in Genesis chapter 2, he could have made Adam any size he wanted, and Adam would have been brand new. And so, whenever God creates something, he never imposes artificial aging in it, because the Bible tells us for God it's impossible for him to lie or deceive. It says that 8 times in the Bible. And so he's not going to create something with a false appearance of age. And so I believe if there was a medical technician measuring Adam the day that God created him, he would discover no gray hair, no chipped teeth, no scars on his face. His cholesterol would be 60 milligrams per liter. He would have been measured brand new. And likewise, Eve would have been brand new as well, because she didn't come from the womb of a woman.
This is one about old earth, and you may have to help me understand the question. How do you reconcile that death would have had to be in the world for millions of years before the fall of man that was said to have brought death? Because I think I've heard that too in Young Earth, debating you in Young Earth, right?
Well, what I've discovered in engaging Young Earth creationists, scientists, and theologians, a bigger issue than the age of the earth is death before Adam. They believe that an all-powerful, all-loving God wouldn't create where creatures are eating one another. But they're failing to appreciate that God created this universe with thermodynamics, with electromagnetism and gravity as tools to eradicate evil. And where you got thermodynamics and gravity and electromagnetism, you will have ongoing decay and eventual physical death. And so there were carnivores before Adam sinned in the garden, because if you eliminate the carnivores, the death rate and the suffering of the herbivores skyrockets. And what I notice, this is a debate issue that's brought up by people who live in cities. People who live in rural areas, they recognize the value of carnivores. They recognize the value of parasites. It actually minimizes death and suffering. Probably the most famous example of what happened in Australia, where they brought rabbits into Australia and they multiplied like crazy, and the carnivores were not eating them. And so they had to bring in carnivores into Australia to go after the rabbits, because what was happening, the rabbit population was getting diseased. It was suffering from genetic defects, but by bringing in the carnivores, they restored the health and the population of the rabbits, and the death rate of the rabbits plummeted. And you see that across the entire animal kingdom. I mean, if you want, you can watch this video clip which shows 1,000 walruses along the beach. And then you have these grizzly bears going down the line of walruses, and the grizzly bears are hugging the walruses. And you say, oh, look how long they're getting along with one another. That's not what's happening. The grizzly bears are looking for the sick and dying walruses. And when they find one that doesn't react to the hugging, they say, oh, this one's sick and dying. And what's interesting, these walruses are much stronger than the grizzly bears. They can easily kill the grizzly. But the walruses actually tolerate the grizzly bears doing this. They seem to have this sense that if they are able to remove these walruses that are in danger of spreading disease amongst the whole walrus tribe, they're better off. And so they just sit there on the beach while the grizzly bears find the ones that are diseased, and they let them attack them and eat them, and they just stay there and watch the whole thing happen, even though they're plenty strong enough to take care of any grizzly that comes their way. They just seem to know they're going to benefit from this.
Okay, we're going to shift to the space. What new findings have the James Webb Telescope? Now, give us a little bit about that, because some may not even know what that is. But what new findings have the James Webb Telescope presented, both good and challenging?
Well, come June, or I think it's July 14th, we're having an all-day workshop on the James Webb Space Telescope. And by the way, it's open to the public. You can live stream and participate in it. And we got astronomers from around the world that are going to come and discuss what's happening with the James Webb Space Telescope. It's the most powerful optical telescope that we've got. I've been posting images of what James Webb has been producing, gorgeous images. I mean, you might not be able to see the glory of God by looking up at the St. Louis sky. I mean, maybe you can see 100 stars. Abraham could see 15,000. But hey, you can look at images from the James Webb Space Telescope and really be astounded by what God created. But what's been going on in the internet, people have been saying that the James Webb is proving that the Big Bang Theory needs to be replaced. And I've been writing articles at reasons.org saying it's the exact opposite. That James Webb is actually giving us a stronger case for the Big Bang. And this is good news for Christians, because the Bible predicted the fundamental features of Big Bang cosmology thousands of years before astronomers discovered them. And so this is good news that the James Webb is actually giving us a stronger case. But one of the challenges was, they said the James Webb is seeing these very early galaxies. Galaxies are formed early in the history of the universe. And at ultraviolet wavelengths, they're about 10 times too bright based on what the Big Bang Theory would predict. And so they said the Big Bang Theory is being challenged. Well, reading the paper, what they were assuming is that star formation during the first billion years of cosmic history was constant, unchanging. And what we see from 1 billion to the present is that the star formation rate is stochastic. It goes up and down like this. And so a team of astronomers said, well, instead of assuming it's steady, why don't we assume it's just like what we see at the rest of the history of the universe? When they did that, they discovered that the ultraviolet brightness of galaxies goes up by a factor of 10. Exactly what they observed. So basically showing, hey.
Now, when you say the Big Bang, because some people hear that and they hear a scientific method that contradicts the Bible. But when you say Big Bang, what are you saying?
Well, here's what the Bible said about the universe thousands of years ago. The universe has a beginning that includes the beginning of space and time. The universe is subject to laws of physics that don't change, where one of those laws is a pervasive law of decay, a reference to the second law of thermodynamics, which means that as the universe expands, and by the way, the Bible speaks about the stretching out of the heavens, the expansion of the universe. And if you have the universe starting off infinitesimally small, expanding under the laws of thermodynamics, that's a universe that gets colder and colder at a highly predictable rate. It was 1925 when astronomers first got an inkling that the Bible got it right, that the universe has a beginning, that includes the beginning of space and time, that the universe is expanding. And as it expands under laws of physics that don't change, which implies the universe gets colder and colder at a highly predictable rate. And only in such a universe is physical life possible. The ancients didn't know that. We now know that's the case. If the universe isn't expanding at a precisely fine-tuned rate, there's no possibility for life anytime, anywhere in the universe. And when the Big Bang was being discovered in the 1920s, astronomers who are not Christians fought it tooth and nail. They immediately recognized its biblical implications. And so they were inventing all different explanations: steady state universe, oscillating universe, reincarnating universe, a hesitation universe. But as we learn more and more about the universe, we realize all those non-theistic explanations fail. The Big Bang wins, which means there must be a God beyond space and time that created it and designed it so that life can exist, and we human beings in particular.
Amen to that. How do you explain soft tissue, and you may have to help me interpret this question, soft tissue in dinosaur fossils in an old Earth creationist model?
Well, my colleague Fazal Rana, our staff biochemist, has written a book, Dinosaur Blood in the Age of the Universe, basically responding to these challenges. So if you want a whole book on it, we've got it. But the claim is that this dinosaur tissue can't possibly be millions of years old because it would decay and be unrecognizable. Well, that's true if the dinosaur tissue is exposed to bacteria, radiation, and oxygen. But if it's inside a bone where it's protected from exposure to oxygen, bacteria, and radiation, it can be preserved in soft tissue form, not just for millions of years, but hundreds of millions of years. And so, for example, you can go to a place in the Canadian Rockies and you can see fossils of the Cambrian explosion animals 538 million years ago, and you can see the soft tissue parts. Why? Because those animals were rapidly covered in a huge mudslide that cut off the oxygen, that isolated it from bacteria and isolated it from radiation, so it was well preserved. And by the way, it wasn't that they discovered the blood of these dinosaurs in these tissues. What they found were vessels that could carry the blood. And so yes, they're right. The blood would decay quickly, but the capillaries that allow for the transfer of the blood, they can be preserved for millions and even hundreds of millions of years. And the authors who made the discovery about this soft tissue, they're Christians. And by the way, they're very upset at how young earth creationists have distorted their findings, and they've gone on public record making the point, hey, you misread what we discovered.
Interesting. Okay, does a single continent work within the plate tectonic science? Did the continents split apart? If so, when in the timeline do you think? And would there be a possible another split of the continents?
Yes, that has happened 5 times. So there's been 5 supercontinent episodes. And with plate tectonics, that's what happens. The land masses will come together to make a supercontinent, and then the plate tectonics will cause that single landmass to split apart, come back together, split apart, come back together. This has been going on for the past 3 billion years. The last time we had a supercontinent was 250 million years ago. That's Pangea. And now we've split apart into the 7 continents. And if you wait long enough, they're going to come back together. And so, but the continental structure we have today is optimal for advanced human civilization. The continents are just the right distribution, just the right size and separation from one another to permit the colonization of all the continental land masses, but also ensure you get the maximum food production on those continents. Because when the continents come together as a supercontinent, you get gigantic deserts in the middle of that supercontinent. So right now, we're at the optimal time. Now, what you see in young earth creationist literature, they believe that Pangea was intact during the flood, and during the 1 year of the flood, this Pangea split apart to make the 7 continents. What they have not fully acknowledged, however, is that means you've got 8,000 miles of plate tectonic movement within less than a year. And we live in California. My wife and I had the opportunity to experience what 2 inches of plate tectonic movement feel like. It destroyed one of our pieces of furniture. Our chest of drawers was thrown against the wall and shattered as a result of just 2 inches. Multiply that up by 8,000 miles,
wow.
And you get such a release of heat and energy, it would evaporate all Earth's water. It would instantly evaporate all plants and animals and turn Earth into a molten sphere. Yes, there is a supercontinent cycle. Very fortunately, it's a very slow, gradual process, just a few centimeters per year, and therefore we are able to survive it just fine. There was no supercontinent during the flood. If there was, Noah's Ark wouldn't have survived.
It's 7:22. Here's what we're going to do. For anybody that has kids in childcare, I'm going to ask you to quietly go ahead and go get them, if you will. We're going to go about another 10 minutes. So if you need to be dismissed, I just ask you to do it quietly. And then Hugh will be out in the atrium. So I'm just going to keep plowing through here. Again, if you need to go ahead and step out, you can do that. Just do it quietly, please. Okay, we're going to get into some of the spiritual world. Tower of Babel. You mentioned Tower of Babel. what was going on there? Was there something spiritual that was happening? Was it only physical? Explain to us a little bit about what you think God was rebuking when he did a mass, humans got to go everywhere and not, confuse their language, etc.
Well, God was trying to stop one world government from happening. That's what was going on in Genesis chapter 11.
Because you said this earlier when we were having dinner. So there seems to be then a mystery in the Tower of Babel with what we see at the end in Revelation as far as a one world government. Is that right? Are there connections there that we can
the
learn?
book of Revelation predicts in the future there will be a return to one world government. Also, you notice it says it will be accompanied by widespread oppression of humanity. And as I mentioned earlier in my talk, if you've got a single corporation with 100% control over the product, you're going to get oppression. They're going to raise the price and lower the quality of the product. Same thing happens if you've got a single government. That's what I love about the United States. We've got 50 states. If you don't like what's going on in your state, you can leave your state and go to another state where things aren't quite as oppressive. So,
as long as that federal government stays in place, right?
Well, notice our founding fathers set up our federal government to have limited powers.
That's right.
Most of the powers would be held by the states, not by the federal government. So that's been a problem. The federal government has collected more power than what our founding fathers intended. But they also set up the federal government so that it had a balance of powers with the judiciary, with the president, and the Congress, because they knew if all the power came into one body, whether it be the Congress or the president or the judiciary, you're going to get oppression.
Yeah.
And so trying to divide the powers, and I think that's what God was doing in Genesis 11, saying, hey, it's not good for one leader to be over all the peoples of the world, or for there just to be one nation and one language. That's going to lead to oppression. And so multiple nations with multiple languages to ensure that nations have to compete with one another for citizens.
So do you think there was some kind of demonic influence also in Tower of Babel? Because I've heard that even the tower itself was more than a physical structure, but reaching somehow some kind of spiritual implication of reaching into the heavens. You got any thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely think there's a demonic element because the people were disobeying God's command to multiply and fill the earth. And I do believe that there was some demonic influence to try to ensure that humanity maintained that rebellion against God. What form it took, people have speculated the Tower of Babel might have been some demonic worship tower. That's possible.
Right.
But we really don't know. The text doesn't give us a lot of information.
Yeah.
But definitely it talks about a rebellion against God's authority. That was going on in some context.
Earlier when you mentioned Noah's flood, you seemed to just to reiterate, if for it to be more of a regional flood and not global, to remove sinful humanity, you're implying that sinful humanity was in one geographic location.
Right.
Speak into that a little bit more.
Well, Genesis 10 and 11 basically implies that previous to the Tower of Babel, humanity was in one region. And so God basically pushed humanity of that one region into all the regions of the world. And what's interesting, if you look at the way the continents and the islands are geographically designed, they're designed so that people can say, go to Great Britain. And because of the English Channel, they actually have a defense against nations in Europe basically invading it. And you see this all over the world. There's mountain ranges, there's rivers, there's oceans, there's straits, basically making it possible to maintain some independence amongst the nations and therefore to prevent worldwide oppression from occurring.
Wow. Tomorrow morning, you're doing 9 a.m.
Yes.
And then 10 a.m. Talk about the 9 a.m. that you're going to do tomorrow morning. That'll be right in here, by the way. It's our Sunday school hour, but he'll be doing a special teaching right in here.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go through my latest book, Rescuing Inerrancy, basically alerting you to the challenge that's happening in seminaries around the world to abandon the doctrine of biblical inerrancy. And as an evangelist, I'm concerned because if we abandon the Bible as the inspired inerrant Word of God, that's going to make it much more challenging to persuade people that this book will actually help them come into a relationship with Jesus Christ. So I'm going to talk about the problem that has arisen in the last 2 decades and what we can do to rectify the problem, and basically communicate science is the friend of biblical inerrancy. It's not the enemy of biblical inerrancy. And also it's going to establish the special creation of humanity. So that's tomorrow at 9.
And then at the 10 a.m., we're going to have fun because I'm going to sit down and we're going to do more of an interview style and get a lot of your story of, you recently did an interview with Glenn Beck, and we were just so moved by that interview. It's I think one of the better interviews that I've seen with you. And so we're going to do our best just to get a lot of your story.
Yeah, it was fun as a conversation I had with Glenn both before the interview and after the interview.
Yeah.
He kept asking me questions about this doctrine of redemption. So that was really fun.
Wow. Can we do it just a couple quick more? Because
Okay.
I just looked and now there's a lot. There are several questions on here. I think we got this last time when you were with us about the boundaries of the earth, and some that believe in a flat earth, they use that language to defend that perspective of the earth. The word boundaries as it relates to the scriptures explaining the earth. What are help us for some? We're not aware at all of the arguments of flat earth. So give us a couple of those and then your response to it.
Well, a lot of flat earth proponents claim that the Bible is a flat earth book. So they use that text, and the boundaries are referring to the protection that God created for humanity and how he separated the continents from the oceans. Probably the most cited passage is the one in the book of Isaiah where it says God looks down on the circle of the earth, and they said, hey, circle, that's flat.
Yeah.
But what they're overlooking is only a spherical body looks circular from a distance at all angles possible. So no matter what angle you look at the earth from outer space, it looks like a circle. Mm-hmm. Only a sphere would fit that description. And so I've written a piece on our website. You can basically just go to our website, put in the search engine flat earth. It'll pop up some articles I've written why the Bible is not a flat earth book, and also talk about how we can deal with the challenges. I mean, one big challenge is flat earthers will say, hey, you people who believe the world is spherical, you claim that you only see the tops of distant mountains. Well, the truth is we can see quite a bit down to the bottom. What they're taking advantage of is most people don't realize the atmosphere of the earth acts like a refractive lens. And so you can see mountains a lot more distant than you would if there was no atmosphere at all. But you still only see the tops of the most distant mountains. There really is a crow's nest effect that proves a spherical earth. And what I tell flat earthers, take a night flight from New York to Santiago, Chile, get a window seat, look out the window, and see what happens to the constellations. They will very slowly turn upside down. I've had an opportunity to do that myself, and that only happens if the earth is spherical. On a flat earth, you would not see that phenomena. But the one I like is the earth can't possibly be flat, because cats would have knocked everything over the edge a long time ago. Oh, and I saw this on a flat earth site. You'll love this. They're now boasting that they've got members all around the globe.
I want to leave with one last recommendation for your book. Earlier, we were having dinner, and you were telling the story about your neighbor. Can you give us just the abbreviated story real quick, just about your neighbor, of sharing your faith with him? And then the book that you were telling Ron and I about, just the book that you recommend. Which one was it again?
Why the Universe is the Way It Is.
Why the Universe is the Way It Is. Just, we'll end with that, because that's such a faith-building story.
Well, I was taking out the trash, and this gentleman was on a bike with his 2 little grandkids, and he just stopped and said, I've heard that there's a scientist in our neighborhood. Do you know who that could possibly be? And I said, well, there's lots of scientists. What kind? He said, oh, it's an astronomer, and he's written books. I said, well, that's probably me. And he said, well, I've been an atheist all my life, and for the first time in my life, I'm questioning my atheism, because I can't explain why I've got the power to reason if indeed there is no God. If there is no God, then we're just here by evolutionary processes, and our ability to reason shouldn't be here at all. So do you have any books that could help me deal with that issue? So I said, well, I asked him a few more questions. I says, I think a good place to start is why the universe is the way it is. He read the book, and it came back to me a few days later, told me he'd read it 3 times, and said, do you have another book? So he got another book. He read Improbable Planet. He read Navigating Genesis, and after that, he just said, my life has been completely changed. And my wife and my friends can't understand it. I'm just so excited and joyful about my discovery of the one that created me. And he was asking me, you know what, I got a lot of friends who are like me, who've been lifelong atheists. How about if I invite them all over and we just have some dialogue, kind of questions like we're doing tonight. My wife got to talk to him. He just says, hey, you know what? My life has been gloriously changed. And I wish that it happened to me a whole lot earlier in my life. So,
isn't that amazing? And I also say, how cool would it be to have an astrophysicist live next door to you that's also a theologian and a pastor? So that's just incredible. Hey, let's give Dr. Ross a big hand tonight. I want to thank you as well for sticking over a little bit. I know we went over time, but it's well worth it. We're going to get Hugh right out there to the atrium. Go ahead and stand if you will. Let's pray. And Hugh, I'll go ahead and dismiss you if you want to. If you want to go ahead and head out, we'll get Rachel to get you back there. I think we may have some prayer team members up here as well tonight. If you're a prayer team and you're still around, go ahead and come on up. If you're here and you need prayer, anything, maybe you have a need for healing or relationship issue, something at work. Maybe you're just here and you're thinking, I need to rethink this Christianity thing in the Bible. Let us talk with you. Let us pray with you and answer some questions. We'd love to do that. Or just you need encouragement. We get it. There's just all kinds of, there's a lot of reasons right now just what is happening. And people are filled with anxiety and lots of curveballs. Man, let's don't do it alone. Let's stand with each other and pray and encourage each other. So if you just need encouragement tonight, our team would love just to pray with you and encourage you. So Lord, we thank you for Hugh and Kathy and their family and Reasons to Believe, Lord. There's their whole ministry and all of the scientists that work with Hugh and the different areas and the traveling they do, the debating they do, the evangelism they do. God, we're grateful for them. We ask you to help them and strengthen their witness and anoint their mind to write and engage and debate, to win people over to the reasons of Christianity, the reasons of the validity of the Bible. God, we thank you. We ask you to bless him. Lord, as we go tonight, bless us, bless our families. Give us wisdom and health in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. God bless you.